Before we begin this podcast, please be advised that the following episode contains language that some listeners may find offensive and inappropriate. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast producers. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the final part of Joseph Johnson's case. When we last left off in our conversation, Joseph recalled the chilling murder of his elderly grandparents. With the deed now done, Joseph's mind turned to covering up his crime, and we hear Joseph's break for freedom on the open Missouri roads on this episode of Voices of a Killer.
So you pack up everything in the car. What's your thought when you're packing these up? You're going to go to Mexico? You're going to go just driving? What?
I had thought to go east because in my mind, most people have the instinct to run toward wilderness or open spaces to hide. But at that age, I had kind of formulated this theory that the cities were actually a better place to disappear like a rat in a sewer, basically.
Yeah. And did you actually drive off and head that way?
Yeah, I did. I headed east, bound towards Kentucky, I believe it was.
What kind of stuff did you pack? Did you take all their credit cards and cash? Did you
Yeah, mostly cash and just random knickknacks,
Did you bring weapons?
Obviously a teenager took.
Did you bring guns?
I did not, because I had thought that on the off chance I got pulled over, weapons would not be a great thing.
Smart.
Even I, in that upper class upbringing, didn't trust cops not to shoot me.
And I think that right there, whenever you go up for parole, it shows that you're not, you had an isolated event, and I'm not saying that it's what you do is justified at all, but you weren't like some killer that took the guns with you to do more harm. You were just like, that was an isolated thing. But so you head out. Did you make it outside of the state of Missouri?
I did not. I forget about this sometimes, but something that a lot of people found amusing was that I had actually taken the family cat with me in a cat carrier on the passenger side.
Were you attached to the cat, or you just did it randomly?
I was definitely attached to it. I mean, it's,
that was your friend?
Animal never really does any wrong, and it was always there to listen to my bullshit.
So you took the cat, and you said you didn't make it out of Missouri?
No, in Platte County, which is almost literally the next county down from where I was at, I got pulled over by state troopers, I believe.
Did they already find your grandparents that quick?
No, but being the genius that I was, I had taken a car when I had never driven before and had a learner's permit.
Oh, okay. Okay, I forgot you were pretty young. So you actually got pulled over for like a traffic violation?
Yeah, and from there on, I had no permit or ID or anything, so they had to get an address, and the rest is history.
Yeah, they got the address and actually went down there and found your grandparents dead?
Yes.
Where were you at? Were you in their custody or on the side of the road when they went and found them?
Yes, and they transferred me to Buchanan County shortly after.
So you were on the side of the road. They were like, hey, let's go get his grandparents. Because they were probably questioning you. Did they kind of feel like something was wrong? Because you just killed, 2 people. Did they, when they were questioning you, were like, something's off?
I think they definitely thought I was odd. But I think what had happened later, I found this after the fact, was that Buchanan County went there, and because I was a juvenile, their procedure was to completely let me believe whatever I wanted. They said they were taking me to Buchanan County. They originally were telling me they were taking me home, but by the time I went past the turnoff, it was obvious I was going to a facility there. And while it was obvious to me what was happening, they still refused to speak to me because as a juvenile, they have very procedural things that they're allowed to do with you.
Yeah, so in order for them to talk to you, they had to get somebody next to kin. Both your grandparents are dead. Who'd they call?
There was no one. Actually, my father was MIA, and all the rest of my family was out of state, so it fell on I want to say a public defender.
Oh, a state. They basically appointed somebody from the state?
Yeah.
And did they come introduce themselves and say, hey, listen, since you're a minor, we can't find any of your next of kin. I'm going to go ahead and speak for you or help you,
Yeah.
And did you go in there and confess?
I did not.
Did you come up with a scheme, a lie about everything?
No, I was honestly tired at that point, and I had lost a lot of fight by that time. I was dealing with the existential crisis that came with the crime itself, and it occupied most of my time just dealing with the trauma of what happened and my own mortality as a consequence.
So you went ahead and broke and told them everything that happened, is what you're saying?
No, but I did eventually take an open plea, which was amount to the same thing long term.
Sure. So you actually never told the cops, hey, this is what happened. This is the first time you're telling somebody to the public?
Yeah, I had given the barest of facts in the court. This is actually the first time I've gone this in depth in a story publicly.
What makes you want to tell your story?
I think it's valuable because obviously I told you once before I talked to Gypsy Rose. I've talked to a few other people my age, and I've seen on the news a lot of people in my position. And when I was young, I had also wondered, are there people like me out there? So, I mean, I think anyone that hears this can maybe gain some perspective or maybe not feel so alienated.
Hours after his grandparents' deaths, Joseph headed east toward Kentucky, hoping to disappear into the cracks of the big city. However, Joseph's inexperience caught up with him, quickly leading to his capture by state troopers. At about 12:30 a.m. on July 4th, Joseph was pulled over in a traffic stop, some 30 miles south of St. Joseph, and officers discovered that he wasn't legally allowed to drive. As they dug deeper, the troopers quickly ascertained that something was deeply amiss. An attempt to contact Joseph's legal guardians led police to discover his grandparents' dead bodies, which now lay in an open field adjacent to their home. By the time Joseph was escorted into an interrogation room, he refused to give a confession. In fact, this interview is the first time Joseph has publicly disclosed how he killed his grandparents, marking a turning point in his life. Since the day he was arrested, Joseph has opened up many times about his crime to other prison inmates. Whether his story can serve as a cautionary tale or a way to process his past trauma, Joseph finds that telling his story can help others in similar situations feel less alone and give him closure over a painful time of his life. Twice in the course of our interview, Joseph mentions the name of a figure who's been a hot topic in the news, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy attracted widespread media attention for her hand in killing her mother in 2015, the same year that Joseph's crime took place. Like Joseph, Gypsy suffered a life of neglect and was abused by a mother who convinced her that she was severely ill and in need of constant medical attention. Tired of her mother's relentless control and being stripped of independence, Gypsy eventually colluded with her boyfriend to murder her mother in her bed. The case has received equal parts controversy and sympathy for Gypsy, who was initially sentenced to 10 years, but served only 8. The more I hear about Joseph's case, the clearer the parallels seem between him and Gypsy's. Seeing as Joseph has talked to Gypsy in the past, I wondered more about their conversations and how their crimes intersect.
Joseph, one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the interview was Gypsy Rose, and I'm not sure if you have access to see all the stuff that goes on the outside, but she's just all over the news. She's got social media. She has a major fan following, and also she has people that's against her. And one of the reasons that people's against her is because she has a co-defendant, and the co-defendant was an autistic kid. And, you know, a lot of people think that she coerced this autistic kid into killing her mother. How much do you know about all that?
I know the majority, mostly what everyone else knows, and a little from personal interaction. I actually made it a point to try to get to know her on a level apart from the crime, because it's too easy for people like us to become identified with that one action.
Sure.
And the fact is that in our minds, it's just another event in a long chain. And especially when we're young, things are intense at the time, but they lose their sting after a lot of years.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's a lot more to Gypsy than just her crime, and I'm sure there's a lot more to you than just, you know, your crime. But if you think about it, y'all are kind of similar, because your grandparents really restricted you, and so much so that you were just even out in the country and, you know, weren't really having any friends over to sleep over. And correct me if I'm wrong, right? That didn't happen, right?
Never.
Yeah. So they really just kind of, you know, they didn't Gypsy's deal was, Munchausen syndrome, where she was made to look like she was sick all the time. But, your deal is just restricting you from anything. But also, like I was going back to, is she had a co-defendant, and a lot of people don't like Gypsy because, they feel bad for the co-defendant because he had autism, and they think that he got the raw end of the deal and she kind of got off with murder. How do you feel about that?
I think, in my personal opinion, that I'm generally met decently because I'm very open about what I did and why I did it, and I don't entertain any illusions as to why. I think one of the reasons she receives so much animosity is because she has, and I use this not in a negative way, but she has excuses, which are some of them quite valid, in the sense that, like, she and I, for real, were not in mentally right places, but I know that ultimately I did what I did because I wanted to. Like, I consciously chose that over running away or something. With her, like, she was in a more addled state of mind. Like, she was, like I was, like, very isolated, but she also had this dude that was kind of willfully engaging in a fantasy.
Yeah.
Back and forth. So you have not only one, you have two minds that aren't on the right keel there. And I think to apply a rational mind to that sort of thing is being unfair to her.
Yeah. Knowing her story, and just your opinion, what do you think should happen to her? You think everything was just? Do you think she should have been let off altogether? What do you think?
Justice-wise, I think mental health treatment would have been the best. I think in her personal life, she needs someone who's willing to be a friend as opposed to searching for romance. Because right now she's in a battle to not only grow up, but learn how to live life, or at the very least gain perspective, like someone like us who's had an adjustment period.
How did you get in touch with her?
Back when we could still write back and forth between prisons, I had seen one of her Lifetime deals, and I had basically just had a bunch of people remarking on the similarities, and I had heard a lot of people dogging on her, and I felt offended by it. So I decided, well, I'm going to find out for myself. At the time, my mother was in my life. I asked her to get the DOC number, and I just wrote both the women's prison addresses and waited to get a response.
What did y'all talk about?
I mean, honestly, we had just started talking about our crimes, and we had started getting to know each other, and then she had met who she was with right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, after that, it kind of terminated.
So do you feel like you have a connection to Gypsy Rose because she had abuse from her mother, and you kind of had the same thing from your grandparents?
We have a passing linkage, just in the kind of trauma we endured, like where our mind ate themselves and we temporarily fell into what I think was kind of a fantasy world, where we were easily susceptible to just doing things just completely the wrong way.
We can find many echoes of Joseph's crime in Gypsies. Both Gypsy and Joseph were morally ambiguous and complicated young people who did the unthinkable in a desperate attempt to exert independence. Just like Gypsy, Joseph's stifling home life stunted his ability to live a happy, free life. And just like Gypsy, Joseph was cut off from interacting with the outside world, which left him unable to think rationally and made murder seem like his only viable escape route. Having these haunting similarities with Gypsy's case, and after exchanging letters with her, Joseph offers some insight into the psychology that pushed both him and Gypsy to take another human life. And although Gypsy's high-profile case received a flood of national interest, I wonder why the news didn't pick up Joseph's case too. Raised in an unloving household and deprived of care, Joseph has been used to living in isolation throughout his life. How has that changed, I wondered, in what is now his new home, the inside bars of his jail cell? I put that question to Joseph after this break.
Listening to your story, man, you kind of was in prison, while you were on the outside with your grandparents. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I often tell people that I was born and raised in prison.
Yeah. Something that also caught my attention, the news actually said, and maybe not just all the articles, maybe just one, but I really did see The news did mention that you were kind of oppressed by your grandparents, so obviously that got out some kind of way. And also the news, I'm surprised they even said that instead of trying to twist it like you were an evil grandkid or something like that. So how do you think they found out the news? Did you tell the police or your defense attorney or what?
I mean, I actually don't know how that got out because I was like, maybe my defense attorney, who is a very nice person, by the way, regardless of the verdict. I can't blame her for that. But I actually don't know. Like I said, I was not really in contact with much of anyone.
Who was your defense attorney?
Sue Rennie from Buchanan County.
And why the nice words?
You know, it caught me by surprise, but I mean, obviously during the trial day, I was kind of jaded. I really went in there like being willing to accept the worst. So when I got it, I didn't faze me, but I turned to the side and Sue Rennie and my paralegal were both crying and apologizing to me. It was kind of heartwarming that someone gave that much of a beeswax. You
felt that something that you don't or never probably really felt, somebody actually caring about you personally, huh?
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Joseph, I feel really bad for you, man. I can't imagine a life as a child, just grandparents that are just kind of bitter about you being in the house, and you're probably always at your own devices and trying to figure out, you know, how to live without pissing them off and stuff like that. It's probably pretty tough, wasn't it?
I mean, it is tough, but I will say that and I thank you for that, by the way, but I will say to everybody that there are gifts that come along with that, and anyone who feels the same way or can sympathize with what I'm going through went through, I should say, is that I've got a lot of mental gifts from that because I lived in my head because I kind of shied away from my emotions. So, I mean, there's a lot of gifts that came with that.
Yeah. Do you have people on the outside that reach out to you, or you have people that you can reach out to?
I do not.
So is your mother still in your life?
No, she's dying of AIDS.
Oh, okay. When's the last time you spoke to your mother?
Here, maybe more.
So yeah, you said she's really sick, but why no communication?
I mean, my mother is a very mentally ill woman, and she's not. There are limits to how much I'm willing to put up with, even from family, as far as asking me to play into delusions and fantasies. And yeah, it may seem callous, but it's just I'm at my limit with it.
Do you make friends in prison?
No, I actually make friends pretty easily. Over the years, I've actually gotten to be a decent people person. I'm always kind of set apart in my mind, at least. But I've met some really good people in there.
You ever get in fights?
Yeah.
How'd you do?
Better than I thought. Honestly, I can honestly say that I only lost one fight in what's now coming up on 10 years. I have a pretty decent amount of, I guess you'd call it, respect. I mean, I'm not big hoss or anything like that, and I'm probably middle of the road by most standards. But
what is your?
I guess childhood just gave me that mean streak.
What is your size, height, weight?
I'm 6 foot, and right now I'm 200 pounds, but it oscillates between 170 and 200, depending on what I'm doing.
Yeah. What are these fights about?
I mean, they're few and far between because I don't have my personality doesn't get me into stupid shit, but mostly when people are just trying to get me to do stuff I don't want to do. I mean, I didn't come to prison for throwing off oppression to put the shackles right back on.
Right. How do you pass your time in there?
Read, write, work out, focus on my spirituality and stuff like that.
So do people in prison know that you're a virgin?
Yeah, I'm very open about everything.
What kind of discussions do you have whenever that comes up?
It's pretty open, obviously the jokes and everything. It's very good-hearted. I find that the more open you are about things and the more you own it, the more accepting people are.
Have you lost your virginity in prison?
Nope. I've gotten plenty of offers, trust me, but no.
Looking back on his trial, Joseph recalls his defense attorney crying after the guilty verdict was announced. Joseph was shocked by this rare act of kindness, a stark contrast to the neglect he'd been used to for many years. Under his grandparents' custody, and for most of his life, Joseph has lacked meaningful relationships and personal connections. Since coming to prison, however, Joseph's circle had grown. Although he hasn't maintained contact with any family members on the outside, behind bars, Joseph has quickly made friends, earned respect, and held his own in prison fights. And though Joseph's virginity is often a subject of curiosity, Joseph handles it with self-assurance and a bit of humor. Throughout our conversation, Joseph comes across as a decent person who had a hard life and made a rash and terrible mistake. He now acknowledges his wrongdoing and seeks a future where he can make amends and move ahead with his life. Before wrapping up this interview, I wanted to give Joseph the opportunity to share his final thoughts with anybody who might be listening out there.
For your situation, I don't do this very often for a couple reasons. I think you really are a good person. Second of all, you are easy to talk to. You can tell you're not like a stupid person. And then finally, the fact that you've never had sex before with a woman. I want to give out your information, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way somebody can contact you, your DOC number is 129-3938. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it's Joseph Johnson. They can just go to JPay or Securus, and they can email you and start a conversation there. I really hope a girl out there hears this and contacts you. I think it'd be great for you to be able to have that.
I appreciate that.
So yeah, I hope giving out your number or something like that, somebody can reach out to you. I know it's happened before with other people I've interviewed, but women are the ones that normally listen to true crime and stuff like that, and they tend to have the soft heart and more than men do. So I hope that somebody reaches out to you. Which also, when it comes to women and soft hearts, that's kind of another point to talk about, is that with Gypsy, she probably got a lot more people that sympathize with her because she's just a little girl. And sometimes if we really put all the same scenarios together and then put a guy in that situation, it doesn't really get as much, publicity or the same kind of publicity, if that makes sense. Do you agree?
I agree. I mean, honestly, do you remember the Slenderman girls?
I do not.
They were two women that did a sacrifice of someone like just being Slenderman, but they were like considered unattractive. And I had always told people that like the attractiveness of the woman and the fact that it's a woman seems to matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure there's like studies on that too. But if a man does something kind of strange and a woman does the exact same thing, a man will be called creepy, and then there's just like lighter words for the women or nothing at all. So it's a big difference. What's that? They
just called my wreck, but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Done. I appreciate how you've interviewed. My last words for anyone out there is regrets of the past can lend ambition to the future, and I hope you have a good one, Toby.
Hey man, anytime you need something, reach out to me, okay?
All right, I will.
Take care.
On the next episode of Voices of a Killer.
I've taken many victims in my life. I've hurt a number of people. I graduated high school in May and murdered a man on July 2nd.
Did you bring up this part where you killed this guy because he was doing stuff to or weird with the kids? Or did you use that excuse at court?
No, because I never said anything like that. I was embarrassed because he had made sexual advances to me, and that I wanted to hide that part of my life. I told him, look, if we kill this guy, he's got a whole bunch of money. We can take his money. We can go party.
Do you feel like that had an effect on you from then on, where that child came in, that was their blood, and you were kind of like the second-hand thought?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank Joseph for sharing his story with us today. His ability to be open and honest is what makes this podcast so special. That's a wrap on this episode of Voices of a Killer. A big shout out to Sonic Futures, who handled the production, audio editing, music licensing, and promotion of this podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, make sure to visit our website at voicesofakiller.com. There you can find previous episodes, transcripts, and additional information about the podcast. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach new listeners. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to share more stories with you in the future. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Toby, and we'll see you next time on Voices of a Killer.